Just a few weeks to the German elections, and the man thought most likely to be the next chancellor has caused a huge scandal, with headlines saying that his actions may have changed German politics forever. So, what exactly happened, and why? The man in question is Friedrich Merz, current leader of the mainstream right-wing CDU, one of two parties making up a parliamentary group that is usually known as the Union. This union is currently polling at around 30%, so it's quite likely that it's going to be the senior partner in the next governing coalition. This election is seen as important because the AfD is expected to gain a lot of seats. This is a more radical right-wing party, widely suspected of pursuing aims that are, in the legal jargon, hostile to the constitution. In other words, it's thought by many people to be a kind of neo-Nazi party, with courts in some states identifying it as clearly right-wing extremist. In the past, the mainstream parties all agreed that whatever happens, the AfD should not be allowed anywhere near power. And that includes the Union, which had promised to maintain a so-called firewall between itself and the AfD. And it's this firewall that critics are now accusing Merz of destroying, after the Union tabled a motion in the Bundestag that passed very narrowly, and only because the AfD voted for it. It's important to note that no legislation has actually been passed, and nothing is necessarily going to change as a result of this. This was a motion, basically a way for the Bundestag to say what it would like to see the government do. It's not even legally binding. But even as I record this video, the Bundestag is in fact debating an actual piece of draft legislation introduced by the Union. It seeks to restrict entry to family members of refugees who enjoy what's known as subsidiary status. And in fact, it's nothing particularly new. Similar restrictions did apply for a few years in the past. This, by the way, is only the start of the process of enacting a law. Even if it passes today's vote, the bill still has to be debated, amended, voted on again, and passed over to the Bundesrat. And it's thought possible that the Bundesrat will refuse to approve it. But back to the subject of this video. The Union proposed a 5-point plan to tighten immigration laws, including, among other things, permanent immigration controls at the borders, something that would, if I'm reading this correctly, violate the Schengen Agreement. It was in fact one of two motions. The other suggested using information technology to identify candidates for deportation. Among other things, it called on the government to require airports and railway stations to keep records of all the IP addresses used by people's phones to connect to the internet. That motion failed quite convincingly, with even AfD politicians opposing it. By all means, crack down hard on illegal immigration, the AfD seems to be saying, but not by setting up a big brother state. This all comes in the wake of a series of murderous attacks by foreign nationals in recent months, with Merz basically arguing that protecting innocent lives has to be a lot more important than worrying about who's voting for your proposals. The Chancellor's response to that was to say, in essence, that the problem is not that there aren't enough laws, it's that existing laws are not being properly enforced. He argued that if the authorities had done what they were supposed to have done when they were supposed to have done them, the attacks in Mannheim, Solingen, Magdeburg and Aschaffenburg would never have happened. Now, Merz didn't actually do anything illegal here, and nobody's accusing him of breaking the law, although some of his proposals might not be legally possible. The problem is that it was clear right from the start that the only way this motion was going to be accepted would be if the AfD voted in favour of it. And the mainstream parties, including the Union, had previously agreed that tabling any motion that would require AfD votes was taboo. Now, whether or not that was a sensible thing to agree on is debatable, but that was the agreement. For his part, Merz said that he was indeed looking for a consensus among the mainstream parties, and if the AfD's votes proved necessary, that would be regrettable. And that statement was interpreted as meaning that Merz was determined to get his motion accepted at all costs. Merz pressed ahead despite knowing that all the mainstream parties, with the exception of about half the FDP, would reject his proposals and accuse him, as they then did, of handing the AfD a victory, or worse, actively collaborating with the AfD. Merz's position is that when people are being slaughtered left, right and centre by evil immigrants, something needs to be done, and it's possible that he does genuinely believe that that's what's happening. After all, it's long been known that Merz is on the reactionary right wing of his party. But there may have been a tactical purpose behind his actions. It's tempting to think that the AfD has split the right-wing vote, and so what needs to happen is for the Union to win back some supporters from the AfD and so weaken it. But if that was his plan, then Merz forgot one very important thing. His actions have angered not only members of all the other mainstream parties, but moderate members of his own party as well. And that is going to cause serious problems for him if he genuinely wants to be Chancellor this spring and keep the AfD out of government. Obviously, the other parties aren't too happy. Merz had given them his word and he let them down. But the Union itself is split on the matter. Although many members do back him, a lot of moderates are absolutely furious and haven't been shy about saying so. This includes some very high-profile party members, such as the Lord Mayor of Berlin and former Chancellor Angela Merkel. Michael Friedmann, a member of the CDU's board in the 1990s and incidentally son of Polish Jews who had been saved by Oskar Schindler, resigned his membership in disgust. Voters also seem to be quite disappointed. According to one survey, most do say that they want stricter immigration controls, but most also say that it was wrong of Merz to cooperate with the AfD like this. Even the AfD isn't exactly supportive of him. One of their members said that to do what from the AfD's perspective is the right thing, only to then back down and call the vote regrettable, was a pretty cowardly thing to do. This matters because it now puts the mainstream left-wing parties in a very difficult position if they want to keep the AfD out of government. Because the way the parties are polling at the moment, they can't do that without the Union. And now they can't trust the word of its Chancellor candidate. And this is where the SPD and the Greens are trapped. If they decide, after everything that's just happened, to enter into a coalition with Merz's Union, they could alienate a lot of their own supporters who, now more than ever, feel that the Union is not much better than the AfD. But if they don't, then the only viable government, if the polls are accurate, is going to be a coalition between the Union and the AfD, the exact thing the other mainstream parties are trying so hard to avoid. And there aren't many people now who are prepared to believe Merz when he says that that is never going to happen. In short, this particular vote isn't in itself that big of a problem. It's actually how democracy works. But it breaks a taboo, makes our likely next Chancellor look untrustworthy, and has even split his own party. Well, as the saying goes, a week is a long time in politics, and there are 3 of them left until the election. It is possible that by the time election day comes around, this whole episode will have been almost forgotten. Possible, but perhaps not likely. Now, I don't of course have a crystal ball, but 2 weeks ago, I would have said that the most likely outcome would have been a union-led coalition with either the SPD, the Greens, or both. Now, I really don't know what's going to happen. Yep, this is going to be the most interesting election we've had for a very long time. As subsidiary. This. And that if the AfD's a coalition between the any motion that would require the votes of the